Langevre, Normandy, June 14, 1944. A British tank sits at the eastern edge of a village that cost over 350 men to take that morning, its barrel pointing down a straight road toward territory Panzer still controls. The gun looks wrong. It is too long for the turret carrying it, the breech opens sideways instead of upward, and a steel box has been welded onto the rear where no factory ever put one. Other crews call it the Frankenstein. Some officers tried to have it banned from the battlefield entirely. The War Office itself once ordered the project that created it to be shut down and forgotten. In a moment, 5 Panther tanks will come down that road. By the time they stop coming, all 5 will be destroyed or disabled. 1 gun, 5 shots, 5 kills, and a weapon that almost never existed. They sent him to a desk, the kind of quiet posting designed to finish a soldier's career without the inconvenience of a formal dismissal. What they could not remove was the sound he carried with him out of that desert, the specific, damning note of a gun that could not reach the thing trying to kill its crew. That sound followed Witheridge everywhere he went afterward, and it shaped every decision he would make for the rest of the war. In January 1943, the Army sent him to Fort Knox, Kentucky, to advise American crews on gunnery. He arrived expecting to teach. Instead, he learned something he had not anticipated. The Sherman tank was mechanically reliable in a way British designs rarely were, simple enough to repair in the field, consistent enough to keep moving when purpose-built military vehicles broke down around it. Witheridge returned to England convinced that the platform was sound. The only problem was the gun. The 75mm cannon the Sherman carried was becoming obsolete against the newest German armour rolling out of German factories, and everyone in British tank circles knew it. What they disagreed about was what to do. Britain already possessed a gun capable of solving the problem. The 17-pounder anti-tank weapon could punch through nearly 6 inches of steel at 1,000 yards. On paper, it killed tigers and panthers with authority. The obstacle was physical, and according to every qualified engineer who examined it, absolute. The 17-pounder needed 40 inches of clearance to absorb its recoil. The Sherman turret offered barely 18. The breech, opening upward as designed, would strike the turret roof before it could swing far enough to load a round. The gun was too big for the space. The physics did not allow it. That conclusion had been reached independently by multiple engineers and filed away as settled. Major George Brighty of the Royal Tank Regiment had not accepted it as settled. Working at the Royal Armoured Corps Gunnery School at Lulworth in Dorset through early 1943, Brighty had spent months staring at the 17-pounder and then staring at a Sherman turret, refusing to agree with everyone who told him the two could never coexist. His solution was crude to the point of being dangerous. He removed the recoil system entirely and bolted the gun rigid to its mount, letting the entire tank absorb the violence that the recoil cylinders were supposed to catch. When fired, the chassis shuddered from front to rear, tools rattled off nearby benches, and the noise inside the turret was enough to leave crew members briefly disoriented. By any professional standard, it was a catastrophe of engineering. By one single standard, it was a revelation. The shell, when it left that barrel, could kill a panther from the front, at ranges where the standard 75mm gun was useless. Witheridge test-fired Brighty's modified gun 3 times from outside the tank before he trusted himself to sit inside it. Then he climbed in and fired it again. And despite the shuddering and the noise and the very real possibility that the turret castings might not survive sustained use, he understood immediately what this improvised weapon represented. It was not a finished solution. It was proof that a solution existed. That distinction was about to become critical because the letter ordering them to stop was already in the mail. The Department of Tank Design sent formal written instructions: cease all work on mounting the 17-pounder inside a Sherman, effective immediately. The reason was not difficult to find. The department had its own project competing for the same requirement, a purpose-built tank called the Challenger that was running late, over budget and underperforming. The last thing anyone managing that program wanted was 2 officers at a gunnery school in Dorset quietly demonstrating, in a weekend's worth of improvised engineering, that the problem the Challenger was struggling to solve was already solved by a modified American tank sitting in a shed. Most projects die at this point. An order arrives from above, files get put away, and 2 inconvenient officers get reassigned. Witheridge made phone calls instead. His first went to Major General Raymond Briggs, former commanding officer of the 1st Armoured Division in North Africa, now director of the Royal Armoured Corps, a man who had watched British crews die inside vehicles whose guns could not answer the enemy and did not need convincing about what was at stake. Through Briggs, Witheridge reached Claude Gibb, Director General of Weapons Production at the Ministry of Supply. Gibb asked one question: could it be built in numbers? The answer was yes, and Gibb overruled the Department of Tank Design. The project became official. Then, almost immediately, it was taken away from the two men who had saved it and handed to professional engineers. Official accounts later described Brighty and Witheridge as highly enthusiastic and devoted amateurs. History's polite way of erasing the inconvenient fact that without their stubbornness, the project would have been dead before it proved anything. Through Briggs, Witheridge reached Claude Gibb, Director General of Weapons Production at the Ministry of Supply. Gibb asked one question: could it be built in numbers? The answer was yes, and Gibb overruled the Department of Tank Design. The project became official. Then, almost immediately, it was taken away from the two men who had saved it and handed to professional engineers. Official accounts later described Brighty and Witheridge as highly enthusiastic and devoted amateurs. History's polite way of erasing the inconvenient fact that without their stubbornness, the project would have been dead before it proved anything. The engineer who inherited the problem was William Kilburn, a civilian attached to the Department of Tank Design at Chertsey, a man who had begun his career designing airships under Barnes-Wallis before moving into armoured vehicles. Kilburn had never been thrown from a burning tank. What he had was the engineering discipline to turn a battlefield improvisation into something a crew could actually trust with their lives. He faced the same wall that had stopped every previous attempt. 40 inches of recoil travel inside 18 inches of available space. He approached it from an angle nobody else had tried. Instead of asking how to force the existing gun into the existing turret, he asked how to redesign the gun so the turret would barely notice the difference. His first change was to rotate the entire breech mechanism 90 degrees. A standard 17-pounder loaded from above, the breech swinging upward to accept each shell before closing again. A Sherman turret was too low for that motion. But a Sherman turret was wider than it was tall. Kilburn turned the breech on its side so it swung left instead of up, requiring loaders to push each shell in horizontally. The motion was less natural, the loading slightly slower, but it worked because the turret had the width the original design demanded in height. That single rotation found the clearance every previous engineer had insisted did not exist. He then discarded the original recoil cylinders and designed shorter, wider replacements mounted on either side of the barrel rather than behind it, each absorbing half the total recoil force independently. Together, they stopped the gun's violent backward travel inside a space the turret could accommodate without structural damage. By November 1943, a working prototype was ready. Before its testing program was even complete, an order went out for 2,100 units. That number was not confidence. It was desperation from men who knew what was waiting across the English Channel and knew the Challenger would never be ready in time. By May 31st, 6 days before the invasion, 342 Fireflies had reached the 21st Army Group. That worked out to 1 per 4 tank troop across the entire force. 3 Shermans whose 75mm guns could not penetrate a Panther's frontal armour from any practical combat range, and 1 modified machine that could. And the Germans figured out which one was which almost immediately. Within days of the landings, orders circulated through Panzer crews across Normandy. Identify the long-barreled Sherman first. Destroy it before anything else. Firefly crews became the most hunted soldiers in the campaign they were supposed to be saving. Which brings the story back to Langevre and Sergeant Wilfred Harris and a road running east toward Tilly-sur-Seulles. Harris had fought since Gold Beach on June 6th with a crew that understood their tank's value and its vulnerability in equal measure. When the first Panthers appeared on the eastern approach road that afternoon, he waited, counting distance, watching the angle, holding the moment until he was certain of a killing hit before the Germans could locate the source of the shot. His gunner, Trooper McKillop, put the first round through the lead Panther's hull. Smoke from the hatches, the tank rolling to a stop in the road. Harris ordered his driver to reverse immediately, pulling back through the village before the Germans could fix his position and respond. He settled into a second firing position on the western side, covering a different approach, and Panthers came from that direction too, unaware that the gun, which had just killed 2 of their tanks, was now sitting on their flank. 3 more shots. 3 more Panthers destroyed or disabled, 5 rounds fired from 2 different positions. Not one miss. The loss rate numbers that emerged from the full Normandy campaign contained a paradox nobody in the War Office had predicted. Despite being the single highest priority target on every German gunner's list, Fireflies were lost at a rate of 19% across the campaign. Standard Shermans, which the Germans considered secondary threats and targeted accordingly, were lost at 29%. The tank hunted hardest survived better than the tanks the enemy largely ignored, because a crew that can kill the thing trying to kill them from a position the enemy has not yet identified changes the arithmetic of survival in ways that hunting priority alone cannot overcome. The Project London tried to bury twice. The Tank 2 rogue officers kept alive against direct orders, the engineering problem a civilian solved by turning a gun sideways. It arrived in Normandy just in time, in just enough numbers, and proved in 5 shots at Langevre exactly what refusing to accept an impossible verdict was worth. They called it the Frankenstein. On June 14, 1944, 5 Panther crews found out why.